Welcome to our series of videos introducing the UK academic sector and job market. The purpose of this series is to introduce you to the academic sector and how it works in the UK, giving you an overview of it as a labour market for those of you who might be considering pursuing your academic career here. Through this series we will identify the types and variety of academic institutions in the UK landscape, explain how the pressures on academic institutions shape their identity, the jobs they offer and the hiring decisions they take. And finally, the series will help you to formulate next steps to support your research of the sector to enhance your knowledge and inform your career. Let's start in this video by looking at the overall shape of the academic sector. What are the key types of institutions? How is the sector organised? What does the hierarchy look like, and how might this help you to navigate an academic career path with this understanding? UK academia is actually quite a large sector in terms of numbers. There are over 160 higher education institutions, or HEIs for short, and most of these are in England and most are in cities. HEIs are not owned or run by government. They are independent legal entities which are publicly funded. They have their own governing bodies or councils which determine strategy and finances and develop courses. The vast majority of these institutions are in England, but also when considering Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland and the institutions in these countries, it's really important to think about how these nations have strong and separate identities, which is a key backdrop if you're looking at an institution here. This can lead you to thinking about the subtleties, contexts and differences in these countries. So Scotland, for example, has a different education system to England, and also in Scotland their undergraduate system is generally 4 years and not 3, a bit more like the US where they specialise later. Policy is also developed separately in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England. So thinking about how the sector has developed over time will allow us to introduce you to some of the language that you hear around the sector and also to show how the history has created this diverse sector. You may well know about Oxford and Cambridge, which have a particular place within UK higher education. Both were founded at approximately the same time, about 800 years ago, first Oxford and then Cambridge. And we all experience the day-to-day reality of the depth of that history by being in the city and participating in academic life here. You will hear reference to these two institutions a lot in a combined term called Oxbridge. They were the only institutions in the UK for a long time, and they are very similar in the way they are set up. For example, the systems of colleges at the fore of how they work. One of the key things to think about is that most higher education institutions are not like Oxbridge. Lots of universities were founded in the 19th century during a big growth period. Many of these were in industrial cities like Sheffield, Manchester and Leeds. They were given the term red brick, which was drawn from the construction of the buildings in these cities at the time. During the 1950s and 1960s, responding to expanding population and a more technological economy, the sector expanded and new universities were established. The Robbins Report at this time recommended this expansion. Then, in 1992, the government passed an act to grant university status to 35 former polytechnics, and these are called the post-92 universities. The polytechnics had their focus both on academic and applied education. For avoidance of confusion, and for those new to the UK landscape, lots of towns have two universities. So, for example, Oxford has the University of Oxford and Oxford Brookes. Usually the one called the University of is the older institution. Many of the newer ones were the former polytechnics, and to avoid confusion, you start to see these different names developing. The history and background information that we've just heard about grounds and propels some of these agendas and priorities of the institutions. And in part, this history explains the diverse nature of the academic sector in the UK. We've talked already a little bit about the long history of Oxbridge. The biggest research-intensive university is one of the red bricks, Manchester, which has around 40,000 students. Now there are large teaching-intensive universities, which are mainly the ex-polytechnics from the 1990s, and these also have very high student numbers. There are also small specialist research institutions like the Institute for Cancer Research or the Royal Agricultural College, whose focus is on a specific area, and some are research only and don't require any teaching. The Open University pioneered the concept of distance learning, used to teach through the television in the 1980s, and now has over 100,000 registered students. Many other universities, both research and teaching intensive, now also offer courses by distance learning. There are getting on for 2.5 million students studying at UK higher education institutions, and Cambridge itself has around 20,000 students. One of the biggest differences that comes out from all of this for you to think about is the distinction between teaching and research focus of the university. This is described often as whether it is a teaching intensive or a research intensive university. This will lead you to thinking about the proportion and balance of time you would have in a day-to-day role there. Working out the priority of research and teaching within a particular place helps you to understand the reality of a particular position. For example, if you're starting to think about the nature of the teaching, you could think about working out the makeup of the student population and the educational backgrounds of the students. One way to do this, for example, is by looking at the Discover Uni website. This not only helps you to understand what the teaching would be like, but also helps you to address the teaching priorities as you might think about presenting yourself as a candidate for a job there, and you can then represent some ideas of what you can offer to address these priorities. Also in the mix, and in looking at the question of priorities of an institution, we can see some of the influence of government policy. For example, the government industrial strategy and approach to industrial development may lead to universities reviewing their collaborations with businesses and looking at vocational routes from education to employment. And it may also change how research is driven. Another angle to come at the diversity of institutions is to think about some of the member organisations that group institutions somewhat by their common nature. This can be a way to help you work out if a university is research intensive or more teaching focused, and what is sometimes talked about as a kind of hierarchy among the institutions. So for example, Million Plus is a grouping of post-92 universities and it represents their interests. The University Alliance is a grouping of universities with a focus on industry links and applied research. The Russell Group is a membership organisation of 24 leading research-intensive universities where research is prioritised and they are generally supportive research environments. This can be a helpful list to use in your research as you work to understand the type of university and whether it's the kind of place that fits where you want to be. One final way to access an understanding of the landscape, and as you are thinking about doing your research on a particular institution to work out their priorities, is to have a look at the mission statement and the values of an institution. These are usually readily available on their web pages. As an example, the mission of the University of Cambridge is to contribute to society through the pursuit of education, learning and research at the highest international levels of excellence. The mission statement of Sheffield Hallam University is, our mission is simple. We transform lives. We do this by shaping our students' futures and preparing them for life after graduation, and by creating knowledge through research and industry partnerships that provide practical solutions to some of the world's greatest challenges. These are a great way to get into the makeup of a university and their priorities, and a good starting point for you to drill down into what their priorities are for different areas like research and teaching and what the balance is on this. You can then link this to their current strategy. Is it about employability of the students, for example? Is it about industrial partnerships and relationships with business? And importantly, you can also think about what values are driving it. And this can often link, of course, back to the history and development of the university. Looking at mission statements and values are also a good way for you to sit back and think about whether this is a mission that aligns with what you want to spend part or all of your career working toward. Thank you very much for listening, and please do listen to the rest of the playlist for more on the UK academic sector and job market.